Okay, we are live.
Okay. Did we find Jason yet? And Stefan, you can go ahead and share their slides for them now first. Okay. We are all here. Chat, so I can see it.
We are kind of waiting for Jason.
I can do mine first if we need.
Okay.
Okay, let's do it.
You have to stop sharing your screen if I'm going to share mine. What do you mean, let's do it, you're going?
I can stop you sharing.
Okay. Am I going?
Yeah, go ahead. Don't start yet, but go ahead and get your screen.
Okay.
So, welcome to the first session of Lightning Talks. Today we have 8 talks scheduled. Take the full hour. If you want to give an advertisement, remember to raise your hand inside the Zoom or try to hit me some other way, and I will try to notice. When a speaker finishes, I will hit the gong, or I will hit the gong to cause the speaker to finish. Could go either way. And say that the advertiser can go and who should be setting up. When the advertiser finishes, we use the gong again. We'll mention who's going to be next and that the next person should start their talk. They'll wait a few seconds so that we can get the video right, and then we will rinse, lather, and repeat. So let's go. Whenever you're ready.
All right, so I'm going to talk about a thing which I think we've all done, which is generating Rust code from C with Perl. So I apologize if this is just repetition for everybody who's been doing this already. So the background is I have this project called PG Pretty I've been working on for a while. And it's a PostgreSQL pretty printer written in Rust. And that's where I'm doing this. So when I first started on this project, I looked at what tools were available. So there's this thing called libpgquery, which is a C library where basically somebody ripped the PG parser code out of the Postgres source and turned it into a library, which is really, really helpful. Because that's the hard work, or quite a bit of the hard work is that building that parser. So I didn't have to do that, that's great. And then there's this Rust wrapper around the C library somebody else wrote called pgquery-sys. Cool. Great. I should be able to get right on this and write my pretty printer. Except the parser from C just gives you this JSON. And the JSON is a lot of JSON. This is an incredibly simple query, and this is what you get. Now, for a more complex query, as you'd imagine, it's much bigger. And this is basically the query structure is an AST. So what's the goal? The goal is I want to turn that JSON into Rust data structures so I can work with them. I need an AST, and specifically I need an AST in Rust. And for an AST, you need nodes, and each node represents one part of the tree. How many node types do we need? Well, for Postgres 10, we need 218 nodes. It's a lot of nodes. This is the C code for the select statement node, which is both for top-level select statements, but you'll also see it in like subselect and so on. And these are all the fields, and there's a bunch of fields, and as you'll see, a lot of these fields are themselves references to other things, like the target list is a list of targets and a list of anyway. I'll get into that more. It's a lot of stuff. So how do I get there? I could do it by hand, but that would be really slow and tedious, error-prone, just a horrible idea, right? So I'm not going to do it by hand. Fortunately, libpgquery has these JSON files with all the parser C types defined in them. So this is what select statement looks like. It tells me there's these fields, what the C type is, what the name is. There's these comments. And some of the nodes in this JSON have just a comment, and it's not super important. Anyway, All that matters is there's JSON that describes this stuff. So how do we turn that JSON into Rust? Right, the answer is Perl, of course. And the Perl kind of does what you'd expect. It reads these JSON files and it writes out a bunch of Rust structs and enums. And it really lets me focus on the interesting parts of the project rather than handwriting 218 AST nodes to implement this. But mapping C to Rust, it has some interesting challenges. One of the biggest challenges is optional fields. So in C, if you have like a pointer to a char, a pointer to a node, is that field optional? Maybe. But Rust is much more specific. So for example, Rust has a string type and then an option string type. And an option string type is optional, and string is never optional. It always has a value. It could be an empty string, but there's no notion of nil or null values in Rust. There's just optional values, and there's some other things. Now, I could make all of the Rust struct fields be option foo, option string, option node, whatever. But that's really, really annoying because in Rust, you can't treat an option string like a string. You have to de-option it, essentially check that it has a value before you work with that value. So avoiding this when possible is ideal. So how do I figure this out? Well, there's yet another sort of programming language involved here, which is a YAC grammar. So I go into the Postgres source code for the YAC grammar, and I start looking at all the places where we make the thing in question to see whether the field is always populated. And if it is, I can make it non-optional. So yeah, that's fun. Lots of fun. And then I was thinking maybe what I need is a parser for the YAC grammar to extract this information. And then I think that I might be going crazy. So this is what the generated struct looks like. It has 18 fields, many of which are node, which means any AST node. There's also list, which is a list of nodes. In a lot of cases, they can't be any node. So select won't contain a create table in the where clause. So then I go back to the PG grammar and I look at the where clause definition and I look at what that means. It says, oh, where a expression, and a expression is this huge long thing that goes on for 400 lines. I give up and I make it a node. But sometimes I can narrow it down and I can make it a more specific type, which is really nice. There's lots still to do. Formatting code is gross. There's more statement types. I want to do PLPG SQL, and then I need to make everything work with the latest PG. Running over time. So last thing, if there's interest in a Rust BOF, I'd be up for it. Let's discuss on Slack. I would prefer tomorrow's BOF slot over Thursday's. Thank you.
Did we have an advertiser ready to go? And Jason, are you hearing you two already? So Stefan, if you could set their slides up.
Stefan?
And while we wait, a quick test. Which one of these sounds better? 1, or 2?
2.
Okay, let's go for 3 then. Oh, there is no 3. Apparently, you have to download to go to the next setting in Zoom. So we'll leave it on medium suppression. Whenever you guys are ready.
Sure, we are ready. So I am Makoto from TPF, the Perl Foundation, and I am going to talk about our summer activities with Jason McIntosh and Stefan. First of all, by summer, I am trying to say it is May through September. If you are coming from the southern hemisphere, it means winter for you. And if you are, far, then welcome to the conference. The next slide. Yes. So in summer, we do a lot of internship-ish things. Google Summer of Code, Google Season of Docs, and outreach. What we do depends on year. This year, we are doing the bottom 2. The last year, we did outreach. And next year, I want to do all 3. But to make it happen, I need volunteers, which I will talk in a minute. So what do we do? One by one. Google Summer of Code. It is a paid internship. So basically, Google hires interns, then they pay, and then they work for 3 months on PAL or Raku projects, and it is open for students. And if you go to the next slide, here's what we did recently. So as you can see, we hire we take volunteer mentor, then we hire interns, then we match, and then work on the project. So that is Google Summer of Docs, Google Summer of Code. Now, Google Season of Docs. We have Jason working with us to organize this. So I will let him speak.
All right, thank you, Makoto. Yes, Season of Docs is a Google program where they offer funds to a number of open source organizations to assist with a documentation project. This is a little different from Summer of Code. Instead of working with interns newer to programming, organizations are expected to use the granted funds to hire professional technical writers. This year, with the blessing of both the Perl Steering Council and the Perl Foundation, I pitched Google a project for auditing Perl's core documentation. They ended up selecting this as one of 30 projects they would fund for 2021's Season of Docs. So for this project, the Perl Foundation has hired Hawar Latif Khan, a technical writer and communications specialist. Hawar is a Season of Docs veteran. He has delivered a documentation audit last year for the ESLint project. And he began his work last month, and we're all pretty stoked about it. And I think we'll have a little bit to say about how you can get involved at the end of this lightning talk. Thanks.
Thank you, Jason. And then moving on, Outreach is something similar to Google Summer of Code. It is also paid internship, 3 months. It used to target women, but they grew to invite other diversity categories. And likewise, if you go to the next slide, we do have a number of projects. And actually, right after me, Stefan is going to talk about open food facts, which he is working on with intern this year. And we get good feedback from interns. You don't have to read everything now, but basically interns learn PAL or Raku, and then they learn new technology, and then they add value to the PAL and Raku community, and then they graduate. So again, Stefan will talk more about Outreach program he's working on this year. But before that, we are looking for volunteers every year. So if you want to help, we are looking for mentor for Outreach and Google Summer of Code. And talk to me for PAL, talk to JJ for Raku. Google Season Docs, talk to Jason McIntosh if you are PAL subject matter expert. Thank you.
So do we have any advertisers? And Stefan, you can go ahead and hook up. You're next. Whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Stefan. I'm the founder of Open Food Facts. So I'm going to just introduce the project in a minute and tell you about what we use Perl for, the challenges we face, and how the Perl Foundation and Outreach are helping us to face some of them. So this is what you see in a shop. And if I ask you to pick the LCS food, what you would have to do is to turn all those packages and read all the fine prints and take notes and compare, and it's going to take a lot of time. So that's why we thought, let's take all this data and put this into a kind of Wikipedia for food products. So we made a mobile app to scan barcodes, and people can take pictures of products. And so fast forward 9 years, we have close to 2 million food products in our database of food products. And of course, when you have products in a food database, then you can do a lot of cool things with them, like crafts and etc. One thing we do as well is also a mobile application where you can scan barcodes, and then from the ingredients, from the nutrition facts table, we compute a lot of indicators to see is the product of good nutritional quality, how processed is it, what about the environmental impact, is it vegetarian, vegan, etc. So there are lots of things, lots of reasons to get interested in the food unit. So we really modeled our project after Wikipedia. So we copied the whole idea of Wikipedia, a crowdsourced project, collaborative project. We are a non-profit, independent from the food industry. And everything we do is open source, and all the data that we collect is in open data. So anyone can use it for any purpose. And we are very happy that, yeah, we have seen tons of reuses of the data in lots of different mobile applications for tons of different people. And also something I'm very proud of, that the community is very proud of, is that we have a lot of scientists that are reusing the data for their research papers. So what we use Perl for? Well, I love Perl, so I try to use Perl for everything in the project, and we use it for almost everything. So we have a web front end, we have an API server, and that does also search and aggregation. We do a lot of analysis of the data. So one thing, for instance, is taking the list of ingredients and trying to cut it into all the individual ingredients, but there are many more things that we do with the data. And for the backend, we use MongoDB, which is a NoSQL database. And I like it a lot because I can take all my Perl hashes of arrays and just put that into JSON into the MongoDB database and then retrieve back later. So that's really nice. One word on just one example of what we do with the data is this ingredient analysis. So we have a list of ingredients in any languages, and we want to really extract those individual ingredients so that we can compute if a product is vegan, for instance, so that we can detect all the food additives, all the allergens, and all that. And to do that, we have a kind of big tree of thousands of ingredients that we created with synonyms and translations in almost all languages. And then we try to parse all that, and it's quite a fun task, a daunting task, especially to do that in all languages. So in terms of challenges, I wish it was as nice as this slide that I showed you earlier, but the reality is that everything is kind of mixed together. It's my fault. So we have one code base that does a lot of things together, and that's because it grew over time. So one thing is that we still use ModPerl, for instance, and we have a very hard time to attract new developers and newcomers. And that's where we were very happy when Makoto from the Perl Foundation told us we could have an outreach intern to help us. So they worked on improving how to set up the project. The big part of the work was to use template toolkit to get rid of all the HTML tags in the code and put it into templates. And now we're working on refactoring to really separate all the big components of the tool. So we did a lot of progress thanks to the interns, but there's still a lot to be done. So I'm very much hoping that some of you may be willing to help us. So if you are, please feel free to join, to talk to me in the Slack or to catch me later. Thank you very much.
Okay, Robert, you're setting up. Anybody need to advertise? Just go ahead and speak up. Then so we'll get moving, and Chris, you will be next. Whenever you're ready.
Hi. So today I'm going to talk about my Chrome and Firefox extension MetaCPAN theme. So why did I do this? Well, one day I was bored and I decided let's do something productive. And I found myself on MetaCPAN Web's GitHub page looking through the issues. And then I found this and I decided I wanted this, which was a feature request for a dark mode theme. And yeah, so I decided to attempt it and I built something that worked, which was important. So this is just some screenshots from my first attempt. And this is a GitHub merge request, which is still open, but I'll get into that in a minute. So this started off quite simple with just CSS for the dark mode theme. And this is the home screen, the recent screen, a module view page, and the source code page. But then I got to here, I was like, well, perhaps people are going to want custom syntax highlighting. Maybe they want a different color, different shade of black, or a different background color. So I decided to add options, and then options turned into more options. And yes, this 100% works, but it wasn't going to get merged anytime soon. And it still hasn't been merged, and it's been a couple of months. So yeah, so I had a new problem that I wanted to solve. I wanted this to work now, and I wanted it, to work right now. And that's where attempt 2 come in, and that's the browser extension. So what is a browser extension? A browser extension is something like a plugin for your browser that adds certain functions and features to it. For example, extensions are used to block ads on web pages, translate text from one language to another, or add pages to a third-party bookmark service. Or in our case, it's simply to change some CSS styles. So let's jump into a live demo. So I thought I'd get interesting here. This is on the Chrome Web Store and also on the Firefox App Store. And this has got MetaCpan open now. So I'll just install this and show you how quick and easy it is to set up dark mode. So I'll jump in. I'll save our first theme as light for the default, and then I'll save another theme as dark so we can switch between. But what we can do for dark is simply change the base scheme to dark mode, and that switches the color scheme for all pages. We have 2 other options here I'll quickly go into. We have Solarized Light and we have Solarized Dark. These are just base themes you can choose from, but for now we'll start from dark. And again, if we go back here and we save, we can now easily switch between a light and a dark mode, which I think is quite neat. But maybe you want to be a bit more adventurous, so maybe we want to change this to blue, and we can do that easily now. And we can just change a color here, like so, and now we have a blue theme. And we hit save, and that's the default there. But maybe we'd go through some pages and we might need to customize some other features. So like here, the secondary color I don't like too much, so we can change that to a darker blue, like so. And if I hit save, this is now persistent. So when I refresh, this will save each time. There's lots of colors you can change here. I'm not going to go into all because it would take quite some time. I'll just jump through them quickly. Like you can change the navigation, you can change the side navigation colors, you can change the input, you can change buttons, links, pagination. Syntax highlighting I'll go into because that's interesting, I guess. So we'll just jump through into syntax, and maybe we want to change the white, and we can do that easily. Just go into syntax, plain color. Maybe we change it to like a pink or something, I don't know. But again, this is persistent, so I save and refresh, and yeah, it's there. The other feature of MetaCpan theme extension is fonts. So we can also change font styles. So we have 2 different font styles we can change. The body font, which is everything but syntax. And then we have syntax font. Let's change that to something a bit more funky. We can also change font size, so we can make it much bigger. And again, if I save this now, this will go through our final feature of this is you can export and you can import. So you can transfer this across browsers. So if you've got Chrome and Firefox, obviously you can't sync them, but you can export and import. So like so I can switch between. That's all. Thank you.
So, Chris, you are setting up now. Are we still completely lacking of advertisers?
John's here.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, okay. I did have a screen, but I'll go ahead and save that for Chris. My name is John Syed. I'm technical recruiter with cPanel. Just wanted to give you all a shout out that if anyone was going to be exploring opportunities or knew anyone that's going to be exploring opportunities in the future, feel free to reach out to me. I am on the Perl Foundation Slack at John Syed. And at 1:45 p.m. Central Time, I did post a update with my contact information on the Perl hashtag. And then tomorrow at 2 p.m., we'll be hosting a hybrid podcast / Q&A style to learn more about WebPros and cPanel and what we got going on over here in our accelerated growth programs. So feel free to join us at Birds of a Feather tomorrow at 2 p.m. Central Time, and we'll see you all there. Thanks, guys, girls.
So Tib will be our next speaker. And Chris, whenever you're ready.
Hi, I'm Chris. This is my brief history of white space and some related white space issues. I think when I originally envisaged it, it seemed a better idea than it did when I tried to write it down. Just getting it down to under 5 minutes and keeping it interesting and coherent is a challenge, but we'll see how we did. Before computers, my great uncle Tub used to run a typography business. This is in the 60s and 70s. He mostly printed business cards and advertising flyers. When I was about 13, he offered to make me some business cards and show me how he did it. Basically, you take a frame and you stuff it full of as many letters as you can because you don't want the letters to move around. It's very visceral, so and selecting letters is quite time consuming, but it did encourage exploring the best placement. It gave you a lot of flexibility because you had different size letters, so you can do small type superscripts and subscripts. He used larger non-printing blocks to allow centralization of letters quickly, so you didn't have to do like 20 regular spaces. And he also had thin spaces, so if you were left and right justifying, you could distribute the spaces evenly between the lines so it didn't look lopsided. At the same time, typewriters were common in both business and domestically. They had three main space controls. They again had regular spaces for word separation. They had a lot of them had a tab mechanism where you had movable metal bars and you released the carriage and it would move forward to where the metal bar was. And this allowed you to line up permanent indentation, things like quotations. It had a return lever for the carriage return, and you get a ping near the end of a line. Correcting errors and doing sub and superscripts was time consuming. Home computers appeared in the late 70s using ASCII. White space here was one of 6 carriage returns and line feeds were similar to what you got on a typewriter and sometimes got a bit confused. Horizontal tabs were under software control. Vertical tabs is the one that usually surprises people because it's very rarely used in programming, but it was quite useful for printing because it allowed the printer mechanism to move down a line without changing the X coordinate, which could save a lot of time. Form feeds were very useful on dot matrix printers. If you wanted to print multiple files out, you could put a form feed between them, and you again had regular spaces. Print languages like PostScript allowed specification of XY coordinates, so you could fine-tune space widths, but the home printers I usually used, if you needed to distribute spaces, it would do two full spaces rather than trying to subdivide the space. And to Donald Knuth, who was writing books on algorithms and didn't like what the word processors at the time were doing. So for instance, the line breaking algorithm for a typical word processor, and this is still true for things like Words and OpenOffice, is you would type along until you got to a position where the next word would no longer fit on the line, and it would start a new line automatically for you. Donald didn't like this because it potentially created increased raggedness. So the top example here shows what Word might do for a 6-space column. He instead preferred to do spaces over the entire paragraph. So he wanted to minimize the square of the space left over at the end of the line. So you'll see here what's happened is that instead of having a 0, a 4, and a 1, which has a large discrepancy in the number of spaces of 4, he's reduced the discrepancy to 2 by moving the BB onto the next line. I came across it when I was working on a system to lay out classified adverts in an Australian listings paper called The Trading Post, which is similar to London's Loot, and I'm sure you have others internationally. We had to implement Knuth's algorithm both horizontally and vertically. You've seen the horizontal example, but one of the requirements was to keep each advert in a single column, so you didn't have half the advert at the bottom of one column and half at the top of the next. So this meant that you had to have spaces between lines which would vary. So again, across the entire paper, we did Knuth on a horizontal as well as vertical basis. Knuth's word processor tech went on to have other later spacing innovations like minimizing ink bleed between thin paper by offsetting the text on two sides of thin paper and keeping translations in sync on opposite pages. So for instance, you wanted to have Bible verses in two languages and keep the verses aligned. Okay, so now we jump forward to Unicode. You have all the ASCII white space, but it's added some additional useful things. So if you wanted to keep your numbers in line between two lines, you've got a space which is exactly the size of a figure. You have non-breaking spaces. So if you have something like Chris Jack and you don't want to split the Chris and the Jack over two lines, you could put a non-breaking space between the two of them. You have a wide variety of variable width spaces. Zero width spaces are useful if you want to indicate in a word that this is a good place for a line break, but you don't want to see a space in other situations. You have special language spaces, which I won't go into. You have a next line character, which is different to character and line feed, and a paragraph sticker project. Finished. That's how you do it in Perl, by the way.
Okay, Tib, you're setting up, and do we have an advertiser?
I have one real quick. So I scheduled a Rust BOF for tomorrow afternoon's BOF session. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, thank you. So Max will be next. Tib, you're up.
Okay, can you see my screen? Can you hear me? Can you see me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep, okay. This is my lightning talk about my big year about GitHub Actions. So I will do a recap of my Perl GitHub Actions experiments and also major events from a key player of continuous integration world. Let's start with August 2019, GitHub Action became free for public repositories. Not long after, I wrote my first GitHub workflow. Then I continued by adding workflows to my other repositories, as everyone. February, Act, no support GitHub Action v2. Act is a tool to run locally your GitHub Actions. Then I had an idea to try to industrialize a bit the GitHub Action to set up a dashboard to continuously build alien modules during the night and have a status during the day and be able to fix them and do pull requests. Then after these 200 workflows in a dashboard, I was asking myself what was the real limit of the GitHub Action service. And the answer was queuing. So it means that you could start a lot of jobs and maybe only 5 or 10 or 20 will be running in parallel, but all the others were just stuck and kindly wait for their turn to start. So I tried 3,000 jobs, build and test cpan module, so the river, and do it every night. And surprisingly, it worked without any issue. I called it River CI. Then I switched the build to my custom Perl blade, which is a Docker image that is built every 20 minutes and pushed to Docker Hub based on the development branch of Perl GitHub repository. And I came with Messy CI workflows, which is a set of workflows examples for various Perl tasks. So you have an idea with this screenshot, but there is various providers, Travis, Circle CI, and various kind of tasks. And in September, GitHub announced the release of its command line interface 1.0. It was in beta for more than 1 year. In October, still GitHub new policy about auto-disabling scheduled workflows. So that was a very bad news for me because all my dashboards were built on top of scheduled workflows. Just a few days after, I received so much email from GitHub, and I just decided to leave my workflows disabled. In November, Travis CI new policy about new pricing model for public repositories. Still in November, Docker new policy about the pool limit. You have to Docker login to benefit from unlimited pool, as before. In February, I was targeted by a nasty pull request from a guy that was trying to run crypto miners into my GitHub Actions. The idea is that you can bypass your limit by running pull requests toward other GitHub Actions through pull request. And I wrote a big blog post about it. Check it out if you haven't already. In March, I wrote my own GitHub Actions, upload to CPAN. It's very useful. You can use it. Please go ahead. In April, GitHub announced the workflow subcommand for this command line interface. 1 day after, I re-enabled with it all my workflows. In April, GitHub new policy about fighting bad actors. So first-time contributors not required to manual approval. There is some other policies that change. And finally, in June, clearly the GitHub Action open bar is closed, and GitHub can slow down your scheduled jobs without further notice, like in this example. And too much queuing will not lead to errors, or just your job won't start at all. And that's all, guys and girls. Thank you.
Okay, that brings us to Max is setting up. And would anyone care to give an ad while Max gets set up? Max, you're next. Okay, we'll flip the last two. Daniel, you're next.
All right. All right, so whether you're talking about Perl or Raku, we both share many things, but we share a linguistic heritage, courtesy of Larry Wall, and writing Perl and Raku really feels both like I am using a natural language and like I am constructing my own language as I go. And I want that language to have all sorts of wonderful characteristics. And of course, I read a lot about good practices in writing programming languages, but it occurred to me the other day that there are a group of people who also think a lot about what it means to write and construct a language. Those are not just programmers, but also the conlangers, people who work on constructing their own languages, either for fun. There are a tremendous number of people who do that as a hobby, or to change the world. There are people who are inventing languages to facilitate international communication, or professionally. You may not have heard of David Peterson, but if you have seen an episode of Game of Thrones or Expanse or a number of other science fiction and fantasy series, you have heard his work. He is a conlanger who has created 2 languages for Game of Thrones and a number of other languages outside of that. And he has a YouTube channel where he talks about all of the different sort of design decisions that go into creating a new and interesting and different artificial language. And I think a lot of those apply to programming. I'm not going to go into too many details there, although I'll have a couple, both because I don't yet understand it well enough and because this is a lightning talk. But his channel is worth checking out, both because it is just really cool and interesting and because it could actually apply to programming. There's another YouTuber who is called The Conlang Critic, and that's his channel there. He also does a sort of comparison and contrast style review of all of these different artificial natural languages, and natural in the sense of non-programming languages. And it's interesting to look at that from sort of a programming lens and think what of those concepts apply to us and what don't, and sort of how we can have that sort of interdisciplinary learning. Like I said, given the format of this talk, I don't have time to go into very many details, but I do want to give you just a couple of tastes of the sort of things that seem to come up when people are thinking about constructed languages. One is some languages can have what's called an enclitic question particle, which is a bunch of fancy words, but it basically means a suffix. Like in Finnish, you can add ko to the end of a word, and that makes it a question. So, you know, instead of having to say, did you go to the store, you could say, you went to the store, ko, and that would turn that sentence into, or I guess it would be, you went ko to the store, but that would turn that sentence into a question, just by prepending the right suffix. If any of you have seen ELISP or a number of other languages that really like to use predicates in their, you know, to name a function that returns a Boolean with a P, or some languages support a question mark at the end, you know, so there's this same idea of, I want to turn what looks like it would be a statement into a yes/no question. In programming, the use of predicates seems to map on very well. Another really fascinating concept that some languages, both natural and artificial constructed, have is a grammatical way to denote inalienable possession. So, you know, speaking in English, we have possessive that grammatically indicates that you own something, but some languages have the idea of inalienable possession. You possess something and you definitely possess it. And that seems to map somewhat onto immutability, but I will stop there and encourage you to go explore. There's a lot to know about.
And now it looks like Max has solved his connection issues, or had. Max, are you back? We may end early today. So while we give him another moment to try to connect, just a reminder, there's still 2 more days of lightning talks. We're going to aim for about 8 each day. They're almost all available, so please sign up. Guess we're going to have to leave it here.
Can I do a quick advert?
Thank you, everybody.
Jeff, can I do a quick advert?
I think Jeffrey's having trouble hearing you. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, for those of you that can hear me, right after the end of the last talk today, for those of you that are on Facebook, we will be having a live get together to just chat about our favorite talks and chit chat like we would have been if we were all in person. So that's on Facebook in the Perl Programmers group. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.